Okay, well, first, I wanted to pick out a section of the Nabokov, which I both enjoyed and felt was very pretentious. And maybe both things can exist, and maybe both are valid readings.
Sure, they can.
So I'm just going to read it. So Nabokov delineates between different types of readers and their respective responses to the story. So he says, the superficial reader of that story will merely see it in the heavy frolics of an extravagant buffoon. The solemn reader will take for granted that Gogol's prime intention was to denounce the horrors of Russian bureaucracy. But neither the person who wants a good laugh, nor the person who craves for books that make one think, will understand what the Overcoat is really about. Give me the creative reader. This is a tale for him.
I like that. I want to be a creative reader.
I do, but I don't like the way that he... And I think at one other point he says something to the extent of a second-rate reader looks for texts that are almost like a friend is writing it, right? Like you're having a relationship that you can relate to, and the writer is someone who could be like your buddy, your chum. And he said, but that's like a shit writer in a way. Like the top writers are so eccentric that they can't even be on your level as the reader. I just felt like I just disagreed with that. First of all, because my favorite text, is Catcher in the Rye, which and Salinger makes a big deal of like saying the opposite, where Holden says the best type of writer is the kind of guy that you want to just call up. And I always liked that because I feel like for me, one of the main functions of art is to like provide you with a type of friendship, even if it's one-sided friendship.
Because such a writer is not phony.
Is
that the word he uses?
Yeah, phony, for sure. It's phony.
Yeah, phony.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, beyond that, that's one aspect.
We don't have to. Yeah. Well, we don't have to buy into Nabokov's hierarchy, but I just like the term creative reader.
Me too.
We can the text is a kind of mirror, and we can for one thing we can see ourselves in it, but also it's kind of a Rorschach test, right, where we see what we want to see,
right,
which would also make it a kind of mirror now that I think about it, I guess. But I'm presuming you're mentioning this first because he would probably argue that this Marxist interpretation is an example of the solemn reader, right?
Exactly, something that's reductive.
Who's looking for something that'll make one think or whatever.
Or is seeing as like from the lens of moralism, and he seems like really keen to extricate it from that type of reading. Like he wants to say that this world that Gogol has created is like like a different world, and it's his world, that so we can't like apply our standard like realistic interpretation, which would include like a Marxist reading.
Well, why is it either or? Can't it be both and? I mean, can't we look at it on multiple levels? To me, that makes the text more the more intricate it is and the more layers there are, the more fascinating it is, right? Like you can look at it from that moral perspective, but you can also say, okay, at the same time it's kind of a fantastic nightmare world. Like why can't it be all
of course, and I think that's right, and I think it should be. And so but are you brave enough to tell me that what the Overcoat is really about then, for assuming that you continue that Nabokov line of thinking?
It's all of these things, it's all of these things. It's a critique and a satire of the hierarchical Russian society of the day.
Yeah, but not according to Nabokov. So I'm saying, what would you say?
Well,
like.
Well, then I don't need his approval.
I know, but I'm just curious if you have like another reading that like is not one that we've mentioned.
This is what I would say.
Okay, go on.
All of these things. It's all of these things. You know, it is a critique and satire of the social hierarchy of that day in Russia. It's at the same time, character study, or if we can even use the term a caricature study, because he's kind of cartoonish, this protagonist. It's also just an entertaining tale, and it does have these fantastic grotesque, nightmarish qualities too. And I still think it's a kind of allegory of the writer or the writerly life on some level. So I don't have to pick and choose.
Sure. But I guess I'm curious in going deeper into that like higher consciousness, let's call it, interpretation. I'm going to read another passage just from a little bit further on, and I think you actually read the first sentence earlier on in the show. So the first sentence starts with the one that you read. The gaps and black holes in the texture of Gogol's style imply flaws in the texture of life itself. Something is very wrong, and all men are mild lunatics engaged in pursuits that seem to them very important, while an absurdly logical force keeps them at their futile jobs. This is the real message of the story. In this world of utter futility, of futile humility, and futile domination, the highest degree that passion, desire, creative urge can attain is a new cloak, which both tailors and customers adore on their knees. So I like that section. But I think the ironic thing...
I love most of that. The only thing I object to is, the real message of the story is. I mean, that's pretty reductive. But I think it, it's like a forerunner of Kafka and the surrealists, and in a way it's very 20th century, even though it's 19th century. Like I agree, you don't, like with the other Russian authors that we love so much, there's much more of an allegiance to a kind of realism,
Mm-hmm.
But but here we've got something different.
Right.
There are elements of the fantastical and the surreal, we could even say, although that wasn't, at that time there was no such concept. It hadn't been articulated yet, but it's there, it's implicit. And
I guess maybe the only thing that existed was something like a ghost story, right? Which this is kind of like a twist on.
Yeah, right. To hear more of this and other episodes of Texting, go to markwillwrite.substack.com.